Sure. Hey, I'm the oldest. I'm Don Lake. We moved here in 1959.
I'm Jay Lake, and I was born here in Windermere in 1961. One of my fun stories is growing up here in Windermere was all the kids that were my age. We all had bicycles and we walked around the dirt roads of Windermere. But one of the best stories I have is taking our little John boats to school. And sometimes I would pick up the girl next door, Shelley Pearson, and we would meet up and we would head over from Lake Down, what's the first lake, to Wasion Bay was the next lake. And we would drive up in the Don Senior Struby's backyard of the beach. We would drag up our boats and get out and walk a block to the Windermere Elementary School, the new Windermere Elementary School. Do you remember that, Don?
That was good. And what was really cool is you had a bunch of friends who were your same grade who also lived on the lake, who also had John boats. And I'm thinking of Brian Fisher was on Lake Down. He would join you. And I know Buck Allen would join you from Wasion. And I don't know, we had John Spears in that group too. I'm not sure, but you guys met as a gang in the middle of Wasion Bay and trooped on in to park it and then walked the last block to school. That was so cool.
That was a lot of fun.
So yeah, so the school we started at was the one that was right here in the old Windermere School, not the old Windermere School, but the old one built in I think 1938, the one where that was torn down for right here. When I was in sixth grade, starting sixth grade, they had completed the new Windermere Elementary School, which is quite old by the way now. And they actually built that pedestrian bridge was built to get the kids to school. That wasn't there before. So so I did one grade there. What was interesting was, everyone complains about the schools and the fact that we have all these portables and people do a poor planning in our county school system. The year we started, 1969, there were portables in that school the first year. How many kids do we have in our class here? I don't know, they were pretty small classes. I'd probably say 20 kids in the school. And what was interesting too, when I was here at the old school right here on Main Street in Sixth, is we integrated when I was in fourth grade, and we had some families down what is now we call Alworth. When we called it Alworth, it was down at the end of Main Street past Chase Road. There was a Grove Road that went back there, and there was some company housing back there for some of the workers for Alworth. And those kids integrated with us and came to school with us in fourth grade. So that was pretty interesting coming, from where we were in the South, and everything was not integrated. And those kids, and they were all super nice kids. And but yeah, that was interesting. That was back when elementaries were 1 through 6, and so of course it's changed now.
Yeah, I was just a little kid. You were in fifth grade here at the old school. And I was just getting started coming out of kindergarten at the Windermere Union Church.
Well, it's funny, this little school here with the little pods of some were broken off. It had been added on to for the years, but there was generally only one. There were sometimes 2 classes per grade, but we had a lunchroom, which was amazing. There was a lunchroom at this place. It was a lot of fun. So when we went to sixth. Over at it was big time. That was a brand new school, 1969. It was a lot more kids. The Gotha school had closed by then. It was basically fallen apart. So the kids from Gotha were now in school with us in 1969 with the Windermere kids at the Windermere Elementary School. What is there today?
One of my favorite stories on a Saturday, things were kind of slow in town. We were kids, is we would meet up at the town hall, play basketball, and where the now is the basketball courts, and right next to there was the old original Windermere Library, with Miss June Raboy used to run it, and there was a slot there where you would return your books. So it was Buck Allen, myself, Greg Smith, who was our First Baptist Church preacher's son, who was the skinniest kid of our friends. We would grab his legs, lean him over, and slide him through the return book slot. And he would shimmy through and then walk around and unlock the front door and let us in. and we would spend time just reading magazines and other things that were silly and fun at the time.
The library was the community room, as I understand it. It was a concrete block house built in the 50s that Junior Boy had converted into the library. And sometime in the mid 60s while I was in elementary. And June was a fabulous lady. She lived on Second Avenue. She was highly educated and passionate about her subject. She loved Egypt. She was our substitute teacher at Lakeview High School and middle school, and we all loved her. She always, not only, she was a fun, nice substitute teacher, but she came in with Egyptian stuff and like gave us a great education. She was a super, super nice lady, and she really developed that entire library on her own. I think she found the books and funded it. She was the only librarian, the only person there. I don't think the poor woman even got paid. But her husband, my dad worked with at now Lockheed Martin. It was the Martin Marietta or the Martin Company back then. And so we had known her. She lived over on Second Avenue. Just really cool lady. But yeah, I didn't. My friends were all too big to put down that slot. No breaking and entering on my side. Hey, it's Don Blake. We moved here in 1959, and I don't think you can tell the story of the history of Windermere without talking about the story of the history of the post office. And so when we moved here in 1959, and I was 4, so but I certainly remember this. It was where the coffee shop is now on Main Street. What's it called? Palomas. And yeah, I should know that. Jay's daughter works there. So that's where the post office was, or one of the buildings next to it was a little post office. We had post office box 77, and I'll never forget it. And it had a great little, you just dial in your little number and open. But that's where everyone met. And then I don't know what year, but at some point it moved across the street where Dixie Cream is now. And it was there for a lot of years as Windermere expanded and more people came in. But at the time, up through that time, no one got mail service at their house. Everyone had to go to the post office. So it was a great community gathering place, and you would see people, never the same people, because who shows up the day to go check your mail at the same time? We're all coming different times. So it was always a place to, see your neighbor or see the neighbor you don't see that often. You always catch up. And it was a great sense of community to go to the post office. Sometime in the mid 80s, when they built the post office where it is now, they started having street delivery service. And so a lot of people kind of abandoned the P.O. box. But I'll say we lost a bit of community in this great little town by not having everyone have to go to the post office every day. I think that was pretty cool. So another thing that was really kind of cool in our childhood in downtown Windermere, right over there where Daryl Nunley is in those shops, the mayor, John Luff, had a store, and we called it John Luff's Country Store. I'm not sure if it had a real name or not, but it had a little diner inside, and it had a little hardware store, and you could had little toys and gadgets. You could get little airplanes and model planes and all those sort of things. So getting off the school bus, when Windermere Elementary, you'd walk over there, but even from high school, I remember, or at least junior high, that was still there. And you'd get the bus, we'd skip your stop and go downtown in case you had some money on you. You'd go get a fountain drink in the little restaurant. They had great little burgers, but it was pretty cool. The Luff's Country Store, and John Luff was the mayor. Long time. It was his father, I believe, or grandfather was the founder of this town. And so a little more on the post office. You mentioned, Chris, the Gotha post office. So we had a kid we went to school with. His name was Andy Seacom, and his mom, and his dad worked at Martin with my dad, but his mom loved doing sweepstakes. And my mom knew this. Of course, I didn't know this. She loved sweepstakes. She would enter them all day long. In fact, she got it where, again, we knew the postal people were friends. The post office workers here in Windermere were our friends. We knew them all, Mrs. Getchy and others. And so she would take her mail and always go to the Gotha post office. She didn't want anybody to know all the sweepstakes she was entering every day. Okay, I want to talk about medical care. in this community. And it was kind of interesting. It was an old country town. We didn't have a doctor here. We had to go to Winter Garden. And so we have a good running joke in our family. I was born up in Maryland, Baltimore, where my dad's first job was. And I was born in Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was then and today state of the art place, just super advanced medicine. And that's where I was born. We moved down here when I was 4. Jay was born here in Winter Garden Memorial, which was in downtown Winter Garden. His doctor, Dr. Scanlon, who was in partnership, they had an office with Dr. Gleason, who lived a very long time around here. But Dr. Scanlon lived in Windermere, right? He was in Jim Henson's house. He built that. That was his house. And when he passed, his sons sold the property to Jim Henson, the Muppet guy. But Dr. Scanlon was a great guy. We went to him as a family. He's a skinny old man, at least that's what we remember. I remembered. But when he delivered Jay, he was, he's one of those, he didn't practice what he preaches. He would deliver Jay, he had a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. So, and they would use ether at the time for mom would say it was so kind of backwards, but caring doctor, but it was ashes were always falling on his lap when he was giving you an exam. It was even funny back then for us. So, hey, I got a story about growing up here on the dirt roads, and this is when we were in elementary, and we were a one policeman town, just so you know, when we were growing up. We didn't have quite the large force you see today, and usually nice, Andy Griffith type fellows. When we came here, at least I remember, it was a man named Mr. Knight who was our police chief, and I don't think he even had a deputy. He was a skinny man with a crew cut. He looked crew cut. He looked, I pictured him as an old dude, but he could have been in his 40s for all I know. But he was super nice, and he had a flashlight that he would carry. We never saw a gun on him. But one night he caught some kids or neighbors over off of Oakdale and between 4th and 5th. And one particular kid, kind of a wise guy kid. I won't mention his name, but Mr. Knight was going to know what's going on over here. And it was in the evening, they were just doing kid stuff. And he smarted back to Mr. Knight. And Mr. Knight, this is how they did things back in the days. He just basically pulled out his flashlight and whacked this kid right on the head. Said, go back home. That was what you got from Mr. Knight. It was pretty cool. So, I don't know. It's a little different these days. Then Jay may have some different stories.
Well, to add to that, Mrs. Knight worked at our lunchroom at the Windermere Elementary School. She was one of our lunch ladies that did the cooking and baked some terrific those cinnamon rolls. I remember it was terrific. But the other thing kids would do to Mr. Knight, and they were older than me, but we used to enjoy it. But kids would run through the town with their GTOs or their muscle cars, and Mr. Knight would chase them, and then they would haul butt through the orange groves until Mr. Knight got stuck. And then they'd sneak back out, and that was kind of a common thing to blaze through Windermere and have the one car police officer chase you and to get him stuck in the orange groves.
Hey, I wanted to talk about schools. I know we talked about Windermere Elementary, but it was kind of interesting growing up here. We were one of the last schools certainly in Florida where the next level up to go to junior high, that what it was called back then, was actually Lakeview High School, which was combined 7 through 12. And it was one of the last schools to do that. Ocoee was too, when they did eventually combine them, I believe in 1976 to West Orange. But so we would get on a bus here in Windermere and go 10 miles all the way to Winter Garden to Lakeview High School, which was all the way in really West Winter Garden. But it was pretty interesting to go, here you are, a 7th grader, which is a little kid, to show up with these big seniors and actually go to the same lunchroom with them. It was pretty unique. And And another thing was there was no other high school options. The next closest, by the way, some of the kids we went to Windermere Elementary with came from Lake Cane Hills, but they went to Oak Ridge. That was the next closest school. There was no Dr. Phillips, there was no Olympia, there were no other schools that were closer. But what I thought was pretty interesting, the bus would start all the way out near Lake Buena Vista and pick up the kids. The Mishes were one family that were out near there. Then it would stop off of Kilgore Road, pick up those kids, pick up the Bay Hill kids. Not a lot of kids, but there were some. And then it would drive all the way to Windermere, pick us up in about 2 stops, 3 stops, and then drive from there nonstop to Lakeview High School, which was pretty. That was a long bus ride, and those poor kids all the way out Lake Buena Vista really had a long bus ride. But but Lakeview was small. I mean, it was like I think my graduating class maybe had a little over 100. It was a little school. It was I think we were double A, I think, school. We were part of the Orange Belt Conference. Ocoee was small. When they merged it with and formed West Orange, that was actually a pretty big school. They pulled in some kids. Now, I was 1975 graduating class, and I was the last graduating class of Lakeview. After that, they turned it into what it is today, a middle school. And my brother Jay, he was 4 years younger, and he was part of the group that went to West Orange. So I can let him mention that.
Well, I can remember going at 7th grade to Lakeview and talking about scary. Here we are, we're still running to lunch, and we've got these big giant seniors that are looking at us like, whoa, who are these little knuckleheads, But it was kind of scary. So I was 77 is when I went to Lakeview. It was turned into a junior high after my brother left. And from there, we went to West Orange. They combined Ocoee High School and Lakeview High School into one. And my graduating class was like 800, to tell you the difference in sizes.
And you were like a 5A school. It was big. You competed with Apopka and then other places.
Okay, my name's Eddie Foote, and I moved here in 1947 when I was about 3 months old. And growing up, some of the things I remember, we never locked our doors when we left the house. The only time we ever even thought about locking the doors, if we went on a week vacation, Dad would say, maybe we should just lock our doors while we're gone. So we would lock them then. We really didn't start locking our doors every day until I was about 14. That was in 1961. And I'm not sure the reason for locking the doors was Dad was thinking a lot more people are moving in, maybe theft might start up sometime, or the fact that my mom and dad got divorced when I was 14 and he didn't want her back in the house. So I don't know the real reason, but we started locking our doors in 1961. Now, I remember the family, an older family that lived here. It was the Riles family. There was Susie Riles, John Riles, and Mac Riles. Susie Riles drove a Model T. And I remember her coming up to the store and getting out of her car. And she always wore brown, loose-fitting khaki pants and a colorful, I call it plaid long sleeve shirt. It was red, black, and gray shirt, long sleeve. And she was a real nice lady. And there was a gentleman, someone she knew, wanted to buy her old Model T. She kept turning him down. No, I'm not going to sell it. He says, well, after a while, he was kind of giving up. So he finally said, well, tell you what, let me buy your car. I'll pay you right now. And you just keep your car for the rest of your life. And when you die, I have someone come and pick it up. So she thought about it and says, okay, that's what she did. And several years later, she passed away, and I'm sure the gentleman came and got his car. Now, John Riles lived right near our house. He was like 2 blocks up the street, and he had a bunch of chickens, and my mom would give me $1 or $2, And I don't remember the cost of the eggs now, but she'd say, go to Mr. Ryle's house and pick up 2 dozen eggs if he's got them. So I'd walk 2 blocks up and ask if he's got the eggs. He'd say, yeah, he'd give them to me, and I'd pay him the money. And several times when I got ready to leave there, I'd walk down, and as soon as I turned on First Street to go to my house, Mrs. Jones lived in the corner house right at the corner of First and Main Street. Eddie, come here a minute. I go over there. She said, do you like apple pie? I said, oh, yes, ma'am, I like apple pie. You wait just a minute. She comes out with a little tin with apple pie. And she says, after you eat this, if you bring that tin back, then there'll be some more in the future for you. I said, okay, yes, ma'am. Well, I went home and I ate that apple pie. I washed it real good and I carried it back to her. In later years, I found out what she did was she sold pies to all the local restaurants around this area. And she'd always have some extra. So she'd have little tins and make up little pies for me and probably a few other people. So I got an apple pie and that kind of a thing from her all the time. Now, in Windermere, there was several blocks in Windermere that were all orange trees. They were all orange groves, nothing else, no houses, just orange trees. I would hunt rabbits in there, and I'd kill them, clean them, and I'd take them to Winter Garden and sell them, 50 cents a piece, cleaned. I put them in a nice chest and carry them down. And the people I sold them to were happy to get them. I remember the potluck dinners that we used to have up here at Town Hall. And the town of Windermere had a lot of good cooks. Those potlucks were just outstanding eating. And I don't remember if they were once a month or once every 3 months. Don't remember, but I ate a lot of potluck dinners here. We also had square dancing, which was taught to us by Joe Johnson and his wife. And they lived at the end of Windermere. And he would come up, and after we learned all the calls, he would call out square dance calls, and we'd all have a good time doing square dancing. So those were some good times. My best friend, Bob Williams, somewhere between we were 9 and 11 years old, I went to spend the night with him, and his mother allowed us to take a rowboat. It had a little kicker on it, I think a 5-horse kicker. And we went across Lake Butler and camped out by ourselves with our 22s. Not sure they knew we had the 22s, but we had a good time over there. Bob had killed a squirrel that day, and I was a little disappointed in him because he didn't want to clean it and eat it. And so he said, let's have a little target practice. I said, what do you mean target practice? He said, I'll tell you what. You take that squirrel up, you stand over there and you hold it up by the tail, the tip of his tail, and I'll shoot him right in the head. I said, and you'll do that for me? He says, yeah. I said, okay. He fired, clipped the tail about 1 inch below my fingers. And I thought maybe he did that on purpose. I'm not sure, because I was a good shot. Up until just about 10 or 15 years ago, I didn't realize how bad a shot he was. We went up to Tennessee and we had a pistol. And I let him shoot several rounds in it. His first 5 shots was high and to the right. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this man can't shoot at all. No wonder he clipped that tail so high. I'll never trust him shooting like that again. So that was a real experience. I learned something then. Mr. Myers, he was our crossing guard. He was a nice old gentleman, probably at that time, in his 60s or 70s, lived up on 2nd Avenue, but he was the nicest man to talk to. I'd always leave early and I'd stop and talk to him a while. And that was nice. And our school, and I'm sure you probably have heard this, but we had 3-room school. First and second was in one room. Third and fourth was in another room. Fifth and sixth was in another room. Now, when we were like in 5th grade, the teacher would start come over. That was Mr. Bertner. He would come over and say, okay, open your math book to such and do all those problems. He'd get us started. He'd walk over and say, now, sixth graders, this is what I want you to do. And that's how that split classroom worked. And it worked real good. But when I was in fourth grade, I think we had 13 teachers that year. Our regular teacher, something happened and she left. We got substitute after substitute. I don't think they could stand us. Mrs. Boston came from Winter Garden and she was mean and strict. Oh, well, she whipped me for something, but I don't remember what it was. But she was mean. But I like fifth grade. In fifth grade now, this is something that the people of Windermere are not aware of. In Windermere, when I was in fifth grade, they were going to elect a junior mayor of Windermere. And the contest was, you had to raise money. It was a penny a vote. My mom and I, we washed cars and did all kinds of neat stuff like that. And I thought that Mary Scanlon was probably going to win because her dad was a doctor and he had a lot of money. And I didn't think I had a chance. But anyhow, I was elected junior mayor of Windermere. Now, I have a piece of paper signed by our governor, Mr. Leroy Collins. So I was elected junior mayor. And I'm still junior mayor today because they haven't reelected anybody. So I am junior mayor of Windermere, and the people might need to know about that. They've never elected anybody since. Our sixth grade graduation was held up at the town hall. It was like they had a play and skits and things. And I was dressed up with a big long raincoat on. I had goggles and a hat like I was a pilot. And I had Beth McCullough. I had her on a tricycle and I was wheeling her around the stage, singing, "Come Josephine on my flying machine." It was quite a song. I got through that. At the boat ramp, and someone may have talked about that, but if you're coming from Kirkman Road into Windermere, as soon as you hit the lake on the right, lake down, just a short ways down, the road made a sharp left turn and looped into Isleworth a little bit, just past where their fence is, I believe, maybe several feet, and then looped back around. It was just a big loop around and then went back straight again. And then someone ran into the lake, and it took a couple of days to find a body. And they decided that they needed to straighten that road out. So they filled all that property in and straightened the road up. And that was the reason that they did that at that time. Our aunt and uncle used to own the beauty shop right here and rented to, it's our other uncle, wasn't it? Yeah. Rented to my other uncle, the barber shop. So that was another little milestone there. In 1974, you're in real estate. In 1974, I bought my first lot here in Windermere, paid $10,000 for it, interior lot. The next year, I bought the lot right beside my house, and I bought it from Mr. and Mrs. Kernahan, and I paid $10,500 for it. Today, it's probably worth $350,000 a lot. So that would have been a good investment. I want to talk about Mr. Paramore. Mr. Paramore ran the gas station and the little mart, if you want to call it that. She had food, fresh sliced meat, fresh vegetables, and they were just really neat people, the Paramores were. And he was the most honest person I've ever met in my life. But I had a friend of mine, he came to me and says, "Eddie, there's a piece of property I want to buy." It was a half a block right here in Windermere. And it was cut from one corner to the other. So it was a real large triangle. I said, "Well, who owns it?" "Mr. Paramore does." "Don't you know him?" I said, "Sure, I know him." So him and I went over to Mr. Paramore's house and said, "Mr. Paramore, we'd like to buy that half a block from you." He said, "Okay." How much do you want for it? He says, 65,000. And I knew not to negotiate with somebody like that. I've always been a believer, whatever you ask for, if I can't pay it, I'll pass on it. I said, okay, we'll buy it. And I said, are you interested in financing it? Or do you want me to go and get a bank loan? He said, well, to start with, I don't want to sell it this year because I already sold another piece of property. And I don't want to pay any more tax on any more sales this year. Let's wait until January. This was early in the year. I don't remember if it was February or March when he agreed to sell it to us. I said, okay. So I got up and I said, now, do you want me to bring you a deposit? He said, no, sir. Just shake my hand. We got a deal. I said, okay. About 3 months later, the news about Disney came out. That they were moving here and buying a bunch of property and all that. So the value of that half a block went way up real quick. And my partner, it was David Bobick, he didn't live here in Windermere. He called me and says, Eddie, you heard about Disney? I said, yeah. He said, we better go over and get a contract from Mr. Paramore or give a deposit or something. I said, no, sir. We shook hands. That's all that matters. He said, Eddie, that's not good. I said, trust me, David, it'll work out. He said, all right, I'll put it in your hands. So January came, about the 5th or 6th, I gave Mr. Paramore a call. I said, now, Mr. Paramore, are you interested in holding the mortgage on this lot? Or do you want me to go out and get a bank loan? He said, well, I really don't want to be a bank right now. You go ahead and get you a bank loan and get back with me. I said, okay. So I called a bank and it was a credit union and they'd never made a lot loan before. It's a teacher's credit union. They said, but we're going to make this loan for you. It's the first lot loan. I said, okay. So I set it up and I said, now look, now talking to the people at the bank, I said, now, when Mr. Paramore walks out of your closing, he has to have a check in his hand for $65,000. Now, Mr. Paramore didn't say anything to me about it, but I know we agreed on $65,000 and he wanted that in his hand. And I said, now I know there's buyer's cost and there's seller's cost. Whatever the seller's cost is, put it on my side of the ledger. I'm going to pay for all his costs, all his expenses, and make sure he walks out with a check for $65,000. They said, okay, Mr. Foote, we'll take care of it. A day before the closing, I was going to double check. And I called her up and I said, could you pull out the closing statements? Because back then they didn't send it to me ahead of time. And I said, read me what the seller's side of the ledger looks like. And she says, okay, you've got to pay this and pay that and pay that. I said, no, hold it, stop. I said, I told y'all when I started this, there'll be no expenses on his side of the ledger. I want him to walk out with a check for $65,000. But Mr. Foote, he has to pay these. I said, no, he doesn't. You put it on my side of the ledger. Okay, Mr. Foote. The next day we went to the closing and he got a check for $65,000. So we were walking out of the building and I said, now, Mr. Paramore, you know that in this closing, that normally the seller has to pay some of these costs, but I put it all on my side of the ledger because I know you wanted $65,000. You're absolutely right. That's what I expected. And I didn't even ever have to ask him. I knew it. And he said, okay. I said, I appreciate you selling it to us. So, but he could have sold us out in a heartbeat. That's where a handshake meant more than a contract like most people have to have. I've seen people with contracts and deals made and back out at the last minute so many times. A handshake is supposed to mean as much as any contract in the world. And that's how I stand on that issue.
Mrs. Paramore, when you went to buy your bologna on Sundays.
Oh, the Paramores, yes. We went there every Sunday and bought stuff.
And she would take a paper bag and she would list what you had bought. And then she would check it the other way.
She would add it up this way. And then when she got done, she'd add it back up this way. And
I
I'm
hear she
sure
was never
someone's
wrong.
already said that.
Yeah,
And
they said that her
she-
math was in
never-
another world.
She never made a mistake.
Yeah.
One other thing, when we first got married, we lived in a duplex. This was in 1970. We lived in a duplex right there on Oakdale. I made a deal with the lady that was renting to us to buy the duplex. Now, she was from out of town. She lived, I think, in Lakeland, somewhere over there. I was going to buy it for $30,000. She said, go ahead and get with the bank and set up everything and tell me when the closing is. I got it set up with the bank. I called her up and said, I've got the closing all set up. Well, she said, well, we have a little problem. I said, well, what's the problem? She said, well, Sandy Quinn, he came down with Disney. I said, yeah. He agreed to pay me $30,000 cash. Can you afford $31,000? I said, yes, I can afford $31,000, but I'm not going to pay you $31,000 because we agreed to $30,000. And she said, well, I'm going to sell it to him for $30,000 cash then if you can't pay me $31,000. And my wife said, let me talk to her. So she got on the phone. She said, look, I'm a school teacher. And in addition to teaching them the class that I teach them a little bit about ethics and what is right and wrong. And the lady says, this is not about ethics or right and wrong. This is a matter of money. Agnes got mad and I got the phone back and I thanked her. And we parted ways. Now I could have swallowed my pride, paid her the $31,000, had a fantastic investment. But I was not going to do that. We made a deal for 30, and that's what I expected her to stick to. And I wasn't going to do anything different. So that's the way I operated. That's the way I was brought up. Yeah, Mr. Paramore, go back on him. He was the most well-versed man I've ever met on politics. He could tell you everything about each person that was running for office. And I don't know how he got his information. There was no computers back then. This was when I was real young, 16, 17 years old. And I don't know where he did his reading or how he got the research, but he could tell you all about these people and who was good and bad and everything. He was really a cool person. And that boils back to I've said this already. He is the most polite, most ethical, and honest person I'd ever met. One example, he worked 7 days a week, and I only saw him close one day at a time, maybe once every few years, maybe for an anniversary or something. But he worked all the time, so he was extremely frugal. Mr. Fay came in there on a Sunday afternoon and said, Perry, I'm flying to Vegas first thing in the morning and I didn't get to the bank. Can you cash a check for me? He said, well, how much you need? He said, $800. Yeah. So he goes upstairs and brings down $800 and counts it out. That was probably a lot of money back then. Counted out $800 and handed him the check. So that tells you, he was frugal. He had money. He had it upstairs. He asked me one afternoon, he said, Eddie, can you come down and mow a lot for me? I said, well, sure. He said, get your tractor and come back by here and we'll go down to the lot. I said, okay. So I got the tractor and rode back up. I got him. And it was down there on Lake Bessie. Down there just as soon as you go around the curve, he owned that property right there on that little peninsula out there. And the bahia was like 4 feet tall. The bahia had to have been growing for 6, 7, 8 months. And my little old Farmel Cub tractor, I put the sled down and went to mow, and the deck just rose up over that bahia, wouldn't cut it. I said, Mr. Paramore, you're gonna have to get a bush hog in here. This little machine is not gonna cut this for you. He said, well, I appreciate you trying. I appreciate you trying. He reached in his pocket and he gave me $15. I said, no, I'm not taking any money. I didn't do anything. I couldn't cut it. Well, you came down here in good effort. I'm gonna pay. I said, no, sir, I'm not gonna take your money. He said, Eddie, you take this $15 now. You did me a favor. You tried to do it. You tried to save me some money. You take it. I said, okay, Mr. Parker, I'll take it. And I didn't want to take it, but I learned a lesson then. I'm kind of the same way. I don't like to take money for anything, but when somebody gets, they're in the right, they're trying to do something for me, sometimes you have to say thank you. And that's the way I am.
Barbara, you want to jump in?
My name is Barbara Foote Frazier, and I've lived here all my life since 1950. And I have to say, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And my roots are here, and I have a lot of memories, but not like Eddie. He can tell you every story. He doesn't ever forget. But the classes where you had 2 grades in a building, yes, and things that you remember and the friends that you have made all these years, just like Craig Lee, we've been together ever since. But the square dancing, we took part in, and the potlucks, and there was just many things that we did here. What I remember was every Friday we were able to go to Johnny's Country Store every Friday, and that was our dinner. So we went there and we got whatever we wanted because our parents weren't with us. So we would walk to the store every Friday, and then we would charge it. So we were able to charge everything we got, and then they would pay the bill at the end of the month. But that was really a great plus because we did enjoy doing that. And, that was our stopping point too. The bus would let us out and we'd all go to the country store and get whatever we wanted at that time. And of course, the Girl Scouts going around from neighbor to neighbor selling Girl Scout cookies. But of course, back then, you really had to walk a distance to get to the house to sell the cookies. But back then, you knew everyone in Windermere. You never met a stranger. And then another time is the skiing. We would go skiing first thing in the morning, or that was a big highlight. It was definitely a great place to grow up.
So what did the girls get into in the 50s growing up?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. Well, we really didn't have a group of girls that got into mischief. It wasn't like that. When I got off the bus, I would always go to Mr. Higginbotham's office. He was a realtor back then. And so a friend of mine, McCarthy McCullough, we would go there, and he was always so nice to all the kids. And so McCarthy and I would always go there and just spend our time there. And then he would take us home in his car. But McCarthy and I, we got into a few things. She was a lot rougher than I was.
What was school break? Obviously, you can't, you're in school and whatnot. So let's just say whether it be summer break or winter break, what was your typical?
My summer breaks were, I was sent to camp every year, Camp Weewaw. And my dad would send me there every year, all summer long. And because he couldn't work and take care of me, I guess. So I was been going to Camp Weewaw since I was age 6, and I was a counselor at Camp Weewaw. So, I was there for many, many years. And that was my summer. And then if there was any spare time, then we would spend maybe a week or two at the beach. And that was it.
Now, let me say one thing about the elementary school we went to. I'm sure most of the people in this area remember Morrison's cafeteria in Orlando. And they seasoned the food just absolutely perfect at Morrison's cafeteria. I've never eaten better food in any cafeteria anywhere. Our elementary school had that same quality of cooking. It's the best cooking I've ever eaten. And I loved going to school to eat my lunch. Well, it was delicious. And if you ate your whole meal, you got a popsicle.
Also, in the Windermere Elementary School, the ladies in the cafeteria that worked happened to live in the community, and they were all the students' parents that came in to work. I'm thinking of
Mrs. Grudlin,
Ms. Kinsey, Ms. Fay, and I'm trying to think who else came in, but it was people that lived in the community, and they always looked out after all the kids, and it was a great experience.
Mrs. Grunlin, I think, had gone to some culinary school or something. She's the one responsible for the quality of the food.
And one thing I remember is there was McCarthy found a dead snake, and she was out stretching the snake out on the deck, and she thought it was dead. So she went and stuck her finger in the snake's mouth, and it bit her. And boy, they called her parents real quick. Her dad was a doctor, and they came and took her in. And I said, McCarthy,
poisonous.
Yeah, I said, McCarthy, what were you thinking?
Now, there's one other thing that no kids do today. When I was in elementary school, we shot marbles before school. And I was pretty good at marbles. Some of the people around here would say, you cleaned me out. I had a little brown suitcase, and it was half full of marbles. I mean, I had a lot of marbles. But we played marbles a lot. Today, I've never seen anybody play marbles.
Agnes Foote. I moved here in 1970 as a bride. We were married in December and took a really short honeymoon, and then came back to the duplex there on Oakdale. And that's where we stayed for
a year.
Yeah, a year, I guess it was. And then we moved to Winter Park, a little section that a friend of Eddie's had some duplexes. And we moved into one side of that duplex. And it's still there today. But the thunderstorms were incredible. I don't know if it was being on that upper level, but it was not something that I was used to. And I mean, we were only 10 miles away when I grew up. But we had a good, we enjoyed being there, and then moved to this duplex a couple of times, I think. Happy to come back to Windermere, particularly to raise our kids here. We owned, what was the address? Across from the Howards, on the corner of
208.
Okay.
Second Avenue.
Swimming, there was always either Lake Butler or Lake Down. Always able to entertain the kids in the afternoon when they would be restless. You'd want them to take a nap, but that one wasn't happening. So you found something else to do. The scariest lake experience that we had was with our neighbor, and we were down by Vera Cars. There's that easement between Carr and I forget who lived in the next one, but it was like a street end. And we were down there playing with the kids, and an alligator came up. And you've never seen women and children get out of the lake as fast as we did that day. Just something that we had not really experienced, because the alligators generally stayed where they needed to be, and we stayed, close to the shore. But that was quite an experience.
So you first came here in 1970,
Mhm.
and so it was the first time you'd been to Windermere at the time, is correct? What was your?
Well, we would take drives on Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
So
But your first time living here, yeah.
here
So what was
in
your first
1970.
impressions of Windermere? Because we hear a lot of stories from, the 40s, 50s, and, you coming in the 70s. What was your
Mhm.
impression of Windermere at that time?
It was a great place. I mean, we enjoyed the lake. We were fortunate that his dad had the property there. Meeting friends that, I was not acquainted with. And then eventually, my oldest brother, they did live here in town, right at the end, well, where the Fays are now. They were next door there. So that was fun. When Disney came, watching the fireworks from the dock, trying not to blow up your own boat with your own fireworks. That was a challenge on occasion.
When they shot off the rocket off the front of the boat, it turned around and came straight back in the boat. It landed back where the gas tanks were. Everybody ran to the front of the boat, and the boat went like this in the water. I mean, it almost sunk in the front. It was something.
Yes, that was.
I'll share with you how good friends are. Bob Williams was my best friend here in town. And I did more with him than anybody else. I mean, when I was 3 and 4 years old, I'd play in sandbox with him. He had a cool sandbox. His dad was a builder and had yellow sand. Oh man, that was great. But I built my house in 1975. And after 20-something years, my daughter called me, says, "Dad, I want to buy your house." I said, "Okay." So we talked it over, and I gave her the dad deal. And we set it up, went to closing. "Dad, we got to move out today." I said, "Today? I got to move out today?" "Yes." "Okay." I started taking my stuff out on the porch and go out that door, and they were coming in the garage. I mean, it was massive move. I called up my friend, Bob Williams. "Bob, I just sold my house to my daughter, and I got to move out tonight. Can I come stay in your downstairs room?" Because he had a 2-story, and just downstairs was 1 bedroom with just a little bitty kitchen. Small, big enough for a bed, and there was a bathroom down there, and that was it, but it was empty. He said, "Well, sure, yeah, y'all move in downstairs, that's fine." Okay, appreciate it. After we've been there for a couple of years, Bob said, "I like having y'all here. Why don't you just stay here forever?" I said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "No, forever." I said, "Well, we really need more room. We've got a lot of stuff, Bob. I think we better get us a place." He said, "Well, all right, if you change your mind, you just let me know." I said, "Okay." It was about 3.5 years later. I was late coming home to dinner at their house. the three of them, Bob and Levina and Agnes, were sitting there. They were eating away, and I got in and I fixed me a plate and I started eating. My wife said, I got something to tell you. I said, oh, what's that? I bought a house today. You bought a house? How much you pay for it? $352,000. I said, well, where is it? Right here in Windermere. I said, well, it sounds like a fair price. Andy, I want to see that house my wife bought today. I'll meet you over there. Okay. We went over, saw the house that she bought. And we finished the deal, bought the house. She thought I'd remodel one room or something. I ripped out everything in the house. Every wall in the house, all the electrical, all the plumbing, everything was out. We redesigned a new house. So everything in the house is brand new, except the exterior walls, which I kept them intact. So I figured it was like a remodel. My taxes would be about the same, maybe. So that's what we did. But that just shows you what a good friend does. On a moment's notice, come move in with me. 3.5 years later, he was satisfied with me living there still. Not many people can do that today. So he was a good partner.
We miss him.
The most frugal man I ever knew. Never bought a lotto ticket ever. Never. His wife bought some, but not him. Not him. He was tight, so he was a good partner to have. We were partners in several land deals, and
Right.
houses and stuff.
And his mother, Mildred, she was a saint.
Yeah, she was. When she was around 90 years old, she died at 93, Mildred did. But when she was around 90, I would go over and spend quite a bit of time with her and talk to her and everything. And she said, Eddie, I pray every day that God will take me soon because all my friends are gone. I said, well, it'll happen in due time. But she gave me something. I'll go back when I was 7 or 8 years old. My uncle he was in the Navy, and he had a Japanese letter opener and a real heavy metal case that you slid it into. And I was showing him what my uncle had given us. And Bob had spent the night with me, and I was showing him that letter opener. And he said, boy, Mom, my mom likes that kind of stuff. She would love something like this. I said, well, Bob, I tell you what, you give it to your mama and tell her it's from me. She said, you give that to her? I said, yeah, my uncle gave it to me and I don't use it for a letter opener. He said, okay. And boy, I don't know if it was the next day, his mama called me and thanked me so much for it. But when she was around 91 or 92, I was talking to her. She comes in and says, I got something for you. Brings in that letter opener. She's used it all these years. All those years. She says, I want you to have this back. I said, no, I'll wait until you're gone. She said, no, because when you're gone, you don't know what happens to all this stuff. Somebody else might walk off with it. I said, okay, I'll take it then. So that was my first inheritance of something that I got from somebody. I got my letter opener back. So it's pretty old.
My name's Molly Rose. I've been in the town since 1993, although I've been driving through it since 1988. Most things in town have improved tremendously since 93, but one problem in the town is our traffic. And I happen to live on Main Street, so I'm very familiar with it. And I just wanted to tell a really funny story from back in 93 when I first moved in, and I had a delivery coming, and it was my grandma's piano. And this truck came, and I live on Dirt Main, and it could not get down Dirt Main or would not go down it. And so they parked on paved Main, and they proceeded, with help from us, to unload this piano and then roll it down Main and cross over, go to Dirt Main, and then into our house. And I got to tell you, it probably took 15 minutes, and there was not one car that came by during that time. And that's how it was in 93. You could pretty much just lay down in the middle of the road, and about every 5 minutes, a car would come by. And I miss those times. It started changing probably in 95, around maybe a little after that, when Keens Point started. And then, of course, there was Butler Sound, and there was then all the other developments going out off of 535. And each year it just gets worse and worse. We now have 25,000 cars going by our house every day. Well, in 93, it was just after they moved the gas station out. And Chamberlain's was, I believe, still here, because they would have like a monthly dinner that was themed. The gas station, for those that don't know, was located where Magnifica is right now. It was here not long, just a few years. I came with the Universal crowd. I was the first one from Los Angeles to relocate here. And we had heard, and prior to that, I had worked for Disney, but never relocated to Florida. But I knew about all the Disney folks that settled in Windermere. And so it was kind of a place that you wanted to be. It was small town. My neighbor said, you've got to go to a town meeting. So the first month I went to a council meeting, and I said, it's like Andy of Mayberry. That's what I thought the town was like Andy of Mayberry, actually. It was very small town. People knew each other. They'd have, potluck dinners once a year or so. And it was nice. I've always appreciated the dirt roads. It just keeps it quaint and small town. And I think that's what makes us different from any other town that I've ever lived in, and probably in Florida. I think that our police do an exceptional job, and it's an interesting that we probably have more police per cap than any other town, maybe in the US, but certainly in Florida. And so I think that's why people move here. They like the safety of it. And if you don't live on Main, I guess the traffic doesn't bother you too much. You know when to come and go. So I had been working for Universal for a long time. Then we were going to build this park. And when it got approved, I was director of planning and development. And so I was the first person to relocate. And I just said, I don't care where I live, but I only want it to be or less than 5 miles from the project, because in California, I had to drive through all that traffic. I did not move right into Windermere. I thought I was going to be here a year and a half and go back. And that would have been 1988. We quickly expanded, obviously. And the park opened in like 1990, I believe. I had to go back to California to stay with him because that's where development was. It's now out here, but at that time it was there. It was a good experience. It wasn't my first park. I had worked on Tokyo Disneyland and stuff, but most everybody had to relocate here. It wasn't like we found a lot of people that worked here. And especially since there was a competition between Disney and Universal. Now it's all different. Everybody gets along, and there's a lot of competition, but employees move back and forth. I met my husband while we were working on the project at the end of the project, and he was actually from Toronto. And so I went up to Toronto for a while, and then he decided he'd like to go somewhere where it's warm. And I said, okay, we'll go to California. That's where my family is. That's where I belong. And he said, no, I want to go to Florida. And I still had a house. So we came back down here, and then he says, I think we should find a house that's on the lake with a view. So we got a realtor and started looking. And the house that we're in now, we went to see, and I was in and out of it in like less than 5 minutes. And I said, absolutely not. I mean, nobody had lived in it for years, and it just needed a lot of work, and it was a lot of yard to take care of. So about 2 months later, he says, oh, it's going to be a beautiful sunset. Let's go to the house, that we looked at and sit on the back porch and have some wine and watch the sunset. So we did, and it was gorgeous. And I said, okay, we'll get a key and we'll do some plans and see how much work is involved and everything. So the next day we did that. So I guess the Sunset was a seller for me. And then we started doing renovations, all inside the house. And the funny part was is that we had been doing this for like 3 months, working on this house with a couple other guys, doing stuff inside, and working during the day and then doing this on nights and weekends. And one night we were there late and we saw Disney fireworks and we had no clue you could see them from our back porch. And I said to the realtor, I said, why didn't you tell people about this or tell us about it? And they just never thought that that was a selling point. But it's beautiful because every night we get to see the fireworks. And that's what sold me. It was the sunset and then this fireworks. And I still thought after 5 years, though, that we would move because I'd never lived anywhere longer than 5 years. And my husband informed me that he had no intentions of moving ever. And so 33 years later, I'm still here. We have what I would call a upper end fish camp now. Our house was originally built in the 40s. It was a fish camp, no indoor plumbing. You can kind of tell how it's been added on to like 3 times over the years. And at one point, when we were doing that renovation, we took down some wall in a bathroom that I think might have been the original kitchen. And we found a plumbing line and it had a 1960 tag on it. So I think that's when the plumbing came inside, was in 1960. So it's getting old. I'm sure when it's sold and somebody else takes it, they will tear it down and they'll build a big old mansion like everybody else is. But for now, it's just a high-end fish camp. My neighbor, again, when we moved in, it was Ken Ward, by the way. They were really, really nice to us and always supportive. Their boys grew up to be good men. Like I said, they were just very nice. If we had a party, we'd invite them. He told stories because Ken grew up coming out to the house on summers and weekends. I believe they lived like in Orlando or maybe Maitland. And so they would come out and he grew up there. And he tells a story about one year when he could actually walk from the back of his house to Bird Island. I mean, he'd get up to about his waist in the water, but that's how low the water went. We thought when we bought here that the lakes were spring fed. I'm sure I was told that. Not that it matters, but the lakes are total runoff. So now that all the housing's built up around it, it impacted the level of the water more so than then. But it's hard to believe that at any one time in the history of these lakes, you could walk straight across. And so that was a fun story of his. I met his mom once and he says, oh, can I bring my mom over to see your house after we had finished, and moved in. And she was a lovely lady. She really was. But we do miss him. Yeah. And I think even though he always complained and, got involved in everything, I think he really cared about the town, and wanted the best for it. He said, oh, you should, volunteer and be on town council. And I said, when I retire, I'll consider it. Well, I retired and I said, oh, I made that promise. And so I did sit on council for about 10 years. And then I took a couple years off or maybe 4 years off. And then I was asked to come back and fill a position. So I had 12 years total on it. And I miss it. I liked doing it. I liked having some control over where I lived, or at least, and I've always done volunteer work. I still do, so that was part of my volunteer. I think it's kind of interesting too that Windermere, as far as I know, is the only or one of the only towns that do not pay their town council or mayor 1 cent. And so this is all done because people love the town. It's a good way to do, just like the boards and the committees and stuff. And we have a lot of good people, and we're all very fortunate here because we couldn't live here unless we really had a good life and made some money. And then after I retired from council, CT called me and said, would you help us out and be the finance chair for Wine and Dine? So I've been involved in that, I don't know, 7 or so years, but a lot of money is raised in Wine and Dine. Over $1 million has been donated from Wine and Dine to various charities out of the town limits. And I feel very privileged to have been part of that. I think that's a good reference for the town. We hope to leave it so it can happen for more years. I think it's pretty much the same town with the extra traffic. And now, of course, with the development going on at 6th and Main, we'll see what goes in there and how that all works. It's hard to imagine having an Ace Hardware in the middle of town. I pretty much stay on the dirt roads. And if the houses have gotten bigger, the properties that were vacant have gotten filled in. I'm not sure if there's much property left. That's a difference. I mean, I guess when we first moved in, all of the homes were pretty small, or most of them. Maybe not down Second, but the rest of it. And Bird Island, I live right across from Bird Island, so it's always been kind of entertaining, but it's gotten obviously more people out there, and I like the music, but a lot of people complain about it, but I don't really mind it. I do mind that they trash it. And it's, again, a sign of the town's concern is that a lot of people go out there a couple times a year and they clean the trash out of it. And that's good.
My name is Rob Matheson, Matheison, and I've lived in Windermere most of my life thus far. My dad was one of those guys that worked at Disneyland and got recruited to get shipped out to open up Walt Disney World way back in the day. So they found property on Ridgewood Drive, moved into our house in 1970. And our family has been in one way or the other, has been in that house ever since. My dad retired from Disney in 1994. And then I've worked for Disney since I was 16. So coming up on 41 years now. And our family is back in that house. My wife and I and our boys moved back in there in 2018 after my dad and his wife, Armay, had settled up in North Carolina. So we've been in that space for quite some time, one way or the other in our family. And ironically, I've known my wife since we were toddlers, since we moved in. I was 3, she was 2, because her dad was the contractor that built that house way back in the day in 1970. So our families go way back, and we're just back in August celebrated our 32nd anniversary. So have a long history in Windermere and in that house specifically. And so, yeah, I always describe Windermere as kind of the perfect town to grow up in. It's sort of the Mayberry in real life in many ways, especially back in the 70s. It still had that very small town feel, playing Little League and being in Cub Scouts, and back when the train still went through town, and just kind of seeing it grow over the years has been interesting. But I think feel like the town is in a good place today. But it's nice being able to share that long time history with the town. My sister Molly was the first girl to play Little League in the Windermere Little League. So it was kind of a milestone that our family was able to participate in. My mom, Kathy Matheson, served on the town council, and she may have been, I don't know that she was the first woman to serve on the town council, but I think early days, one of the first back in the 70s. My dad was very active in the Rotary Club here in town. So our hearts are very much tied into the town and being part of that experience. So being able to be here now with our kids, and our kids are getting grown and starting to have grandkids, to be able to kind of experience the town with them has been kind of the perfect way to grow up and build a family and have a family over time. I went to Windermere Elementary back in the day. I love that it, for the most part, is still recognizable. For those of us who went to West Orange High School and that building is completely gone and got rebuilt, you can't go back to your high school, but seeing Windermere Elementary still look like what it did back in the day is neat. But I have great memories of, like I said, playing Little League. Even before playing Little League, I remember when the ball field was essentially where the library sits now. My friend Laura Smathers, who lived down the block from us on Ridgewood, she was about the same age as I was. She had brothers played Little League, and we would go, in theory, to go watch a game, but we were really running around under the bleachers finding empty soda bottles that we could then run over to the Ready Market to get the deposit back on, and then use the deposit money to buy candy at the Ready Markets, and then we could go back and watch the baseball game with pockets full of candy. So it was early entrepreneurship, making the best of the Little League games, but then being able to play there, the fact that it was right there in the center of town was just a great way to gather the town together for those baseball games. And back when a lot of the newer tennis courts are fantastic. In my head, they've probably been there 20 years. I still think of them as the new tennis courts on Main Street. But back when they were still more near the town hall, same kind of thing, with having that activity just right there in the center of town was really cool. And I have little scattered memories, and I need somebody to check my memory on whether it's accurate or not. I may have been for the bicentennial. I don't know if they did this for every 4th of July, but I remember when the train tracks still ran through town, that they had an engine dressed up and red, white, and blue banners and whatnot coming down for I'm assuming the bicentennial, again, could have been for 4th of July celebrations. But I remember, that kind of full parade activity at times like that. I remember being in Indian Guides, and we got to march down Main Street for a parade. I can't even remember what the celebration was, but I can certainly remember being very excited about being able to march in the parade down Main Street. And they used to do the big, I think they still do, but had the big Halloween autumn festival there behind Town Hall. Was always a big deal. Being a kid, those little kind of snippets of memory growing up in Windermere. I remember when they put sidewalk bike path, paved bike path into the town. That was a big deal, of not having to slog your bicycle through soft sugar sand trying to get to school every day. So that was those little milestones growing up that made such a big difference. And it seems silly now, but at the time it was a big deal, because if you didn't have a bicycle with fairly fat tires to get through the sand, it was going to be a slog getting to school every day. But I do love that we lived close enough that school was a bike ride away and not a bus ride away through elementary school. Certainly being on the lakes, I think even my mother-in-law sometimes questions the fact that we still live on a dirt road, for people who don't understand kind of the culture of Windermere, but the commitment to keeping the roads sand, because the difference that makes for runoff going into the lakes, and really helping to maintain and keep that pristine nature of the lakes without having asphalt runoff going into the chain of lakes. Sand isn't ideal, but at the same time, it's what helps keep Windermere. And I think the fact that everybody values that and is willing to kind of keep that commitment to preserve the area, I think says a lot. This week, it is funny, it popped in my head because it's been so cool this week. I do remember in elementary school, we had 2 quote unquote snow days. I definitely put that in quotes, where certainly it didn't snow, or no snow reached the ground if it did snow, but it was cold enough that the heating system at the elementary school couldn't keep up for how cold it was outside. So we got 2 days off from school because the temperatures were so frigid, I think down to freezing. So that was a big deal being a Florida kid getting a snow day from school. That was pretty exciting. Haven't gotten one since then. I know I love the fact that the art gallery is still in town. Memories of, I never went there, but my sisters went there for classes, and we still have framed pieces of art that they worked on back in the day when they were taking classes there. So the fact that that's still there, and the fact that that's still there and available to people in town, and it just has that long history going back, is great. That it's those little thread, those kind of threads that weave all the way through. Certainly the town has changed. Definitely Central Florida certainly has changed significantly in the last 50 years. But there's still the elementary school, even though this building, has obviously been completely rebuilt, but it's still in the same location where it's always been. Town halls is still there from my childhood, even though the occupants of Dixie Cream and Tim's Wine Market, that used to be the Ready Market and the post office, but that building is still there, and that common thread, the Baptist church and what originally was the Union Church, that's now also buildings for the family church, that those are all still there and still thriving and being an integral part of the community. Seeing those continuous threads through the years is really unique, because not every town, especially in Central Florida, where things can be so ephemeral and so short-lived, to see that kind of history preserved in one space. I mean, of course, things are going to change over time, but I think Windermere has done a great job of just preserving that look and feel of why you want to be in Windermere to begin with. When we first moved here, again, it was 1970, a year before Walt Disney World opened. There were Disney guys that bought in Windermere, and there's others that bought in Winter Park, whatever, because we were all coming from Southern California. They didn't necessarily know the area. And people were kind of, well, why do you want to live in Windermere? It's out in the middle of nowhere. It seems it's in the boonies. And of course, 50 years later, I think the guys that chose to settle down in Windermere kind of been proven right over the years that it was the ideal place to be, both from a work standpoint, but also just the community that they were able to become a part of and help to build over the years as well. And really, again, my folks, both from California, but I think they really, it was important to them to become involved in the local community. Like I said, getting in a town council or Rotary or Scouts, Little League, whatever, that it was very important to them to be part of that community and not just be a resident of the community. The house I run, also my father-in-law, Alan Trevelyan, is a contractor in Winter Park. He built our house there on Ridgewood, across the street on the lake on Ridgewood. He built a house from my grandparents, my dad's mom and dad, and they moved in, I want to say 72 or 74, and had that house for many years. My grandmother passed away while I was in college. I want to say it was 1988. And then my mom's folks moved in there and lived there for quite a while. And then my sister Molly and her husband moved in, and they were actually, when we first moved back into the house in 2018, they were our across the street neighbors, which is great. Fortunately, a good relationship with my sisters, so it was nice being neighbors with them. And they're up at, we have property up in North Carolina that they live at full time now, but that house was very much my parents rebuilding the ranch house they had up in Northern California that rebuilt there, and spent a lot of time either in the house or down in the lake, especially as a kid, to be able to have, I mean, even though we didn't live on the lake, we had easy lake access thanks to Grandma and Grandpa's house across the street, and spent a lot of time on that beachfront, and certainly learned how to. I'm not an avid skier, but I have skied and certainly learned how to ski on these lakes and going out on the kneeboard. Fishing. There's a cove right there around the corner from where George Hill. I'm saying George Hill on the wall here. But their house was around the corner from what we've always referred to as the lake house across the street. But there was a cove in there where there were at least there's a couple alligators that you could count on hearing and sometimes seeing at night. I don't statute of limitations is probably expired at this point. So, okay, for me to tell the story, I remember my grandfather, there were people who would feed, nobody in our family because we knew better, but people that would feed marshmallows to the alligators because they would float on the water and they would come up and eat them. I don't know how they got a taste for marshmallows, I'm not sure. But my grandfather was fishing off the dock there at the lake house. My mom's dad, Art Palmer, was fishing off the dock and realized that there was about a 4-foot gator that was going after the bobber on his line as he's fishing. And my grandfather was a fun guy. He gave him that idea, like he moved the bobber down right next to the hook. And the next time the gator went after that bobber, he hooked the gator and was able to bring him in. And he took the gator up to our house across the street and placed it in the bathtub, where it remained until my sister Molly discovered it because no one had told her that there was an alligator currently in the bathtub. I think she's recovered from that by now, but at the time, as you can imagine, going in thinking you're getting ready to take a shower or bath and finding an alligator in there was a little bit of a surprise. But so stuff like that. And we had a golden retriever named Amber when I was a kid that would go down, especially when it was warm, just about every day. She would spend a good 6 to 7 hours in the lake, and you could see, because where the sand would be lighter where she would walk, there was a line back and forth where she would just walk back and forth with her head face down, looking at fish, occasionally trying to jump after. I don't know that she ever caught one, but every day she would just go down there and walk back and forth in the water, trying to go after the fish, and dreams of catching her own fish one day, I guess. This is kind of a non sequitur but connected in my head. We still have in our front yard a big cast iron bell. And Ridgewood was, all of Ridgewood was kind of our play area, because the space there at Lee and Ridgewood, when I was a kid, was all woods. There were no houses in that space at all. And it was Mrs. McAllister that lived on Ridgewood that owned that property. So it's Mrs. McAllister's Woods is how we thought of it. So there's ample space in there to go run around in the Grove as a kid, up and down the street, or just, literally in the street. But we had a big cast iron bell and a post in our front yard. Or if we were down at the lake, if it was time to come in, it was dinner time, or for whatever reason we needed to come in, my mother would go out into the front yard and ring the big bell, and you could hear it wherever you were. If you heard the bell, you knew it was time to head home quickly. So in the days before she could text, long before she could send a text to get the kids home, the bell was there to make sure we understood. And like kids who grew up in the city, they would say, well, when the street lights come on, it was time to come home. Well, it's Windermere. We didn't have street. Well, I'd take it back. We do have one street light right on our corner. We didn't pay attention to what time it came on or not. So yeah, if you heard the bell, you knew it was time to come in. And again, because I've always said, I grew up, one of my good friends, Mike Basilla, lived right here on 6th Avenue, kind of behind where we're sitting now. The beauty of growing up in Windermere, living on a dirt road, anytime you wanted to play football, soccer, whatever game, you could play in the street, and you had an immediate field set up, because all you had to do was drag your heel across the street to make a line, and there was your end zone. however you're going to set the boundaries of the edge of the street or the sidelines and the end zones, or drag your heel across and that's the end zone. So you had a perfect spot to play soccer, football, whatever. And certainly there was not kind of the traffic that we see now that you had to worry about the new kids playing the street. I remember I know I'm all over the place right now, but over here by the town building, Public Works had a big pile of dirt and clay and just fill dirt that they would probably use for whatever. Of course, anytime you're a kid and you see a big pile of dirt, that is automatic playground. So I remember because it was such a small and safe town, we were free to just go wherever on our bikes during the day, and we would go meet up with friends, go play on the pile of dirt, and bring Hot Wheels cars or whatever you were going to make paths for in the big pile of dirt and go play over there. So yeah, I always go back. It was, and I think it still is, but it was a ideal place to grow up and have a childhood in the town of Windermere, because I don't know that our kids get that kind of freedom now anywhere. It doesn't matter really where they grow up, because it's just different times. But to have, at a 9-10 years old, to know you could just in the summer hop on your bike and go see your friends, and as long as you knew what time you needed to be home, and your parents basically knew who you were hanging out with, and to have that freedom to just kind of go out and explore and be a kid, and just kind of have the free reign, I guess. Not quite Lord of the Flies, but just to be able to go out and enjoy it and not have to worry about being on a leash, I guess. I'm very grateful that the folks that purchased the house, we expected, it's an older house. I thought maybe that they would just tear it down and start over, but they really have preserved the architecture of that house and kept it they've certainly updated it, and it looks fantastic, but for the most part, kind of preserved the look of the house. And even from my childhood, that I'm grateful to see that. It's certainly not everything from your childhood lasts forever, but having those kind of touch points that I can still go back to is like I said, I'm grateful to see that. If you told, even as a teenager, if you told me that at some point traffic was going to be a problem in Windermere, it would have said you're crazy, because it just wasn't a thing. The only problem, the only traffic problem you had in Windermere was make sure you don't drive 31 miles an hour or you're going to get a ticket. Which, as a teenager, that bothered me. Now I'm in my late 50s, and I'm very happy with them. I have no issue with the town police keeping an eye on that and keeping people from going crazy through the road. Infrastructure wise, I remember at the time thinking that the traffic circles were a dumb idea and were never going to work. I am more than happy to admit how wrong I was on that, and I'm happy that that was the solution and not a traffic light, because I think, as dumb as it may sound, a traffic light in Windermere just doesn't feel right, because we're not even a one light town. We're a no light town, and kind of always have been. But I think it's certainly forces around us, kind of beyond the town's control, that have created the traffic flow issue, and the fact that if you look at a map of Windermere, we are essentially an island, and just with 3 access points. So I don't know I would love to tell everybody how smart I am and come up with a great idea of here's how you fix all that. So I certainly don't have that solution, but I will say, obviously, despite the traffic that people get frustrated with, obviously all of us are willing to put up with that because we like living in town so much. So I think that may say a lot for the town, that other places that traffic may have driven people away, no pun intended. But here it's just something you're willing to put up with because the town is so great, and gives you reason to want to be here. I think I'm just going back into kid memory stuff. I can remember, especially with all the brand new development here on Main Street. Now that Allen's is gone, I can remember going to Allen's when it was the dentist's office. So the irony that it went from a dentist's office to a sweet shop is pretty funny to me. But also when the country store was there kind of on the corner as well. And this is the best thing ever when you're a kid, knowing that my parents had an account there, so I could just go there and put it on the family account. And because they literally had, to my mind as a kid, that they had everything. And going in there to buy, I remember buying like model glue and model paint to build models with, and being able to put it on the account and not have to worry about, I was probably spending $3, but at the time that felt like a big deal as a kid. But as a kid, being able to go in there and they knew who I was, and that the arrangement was that easy, that kind of thing that you just wouldn't see anywhere anymore. But the kind of relationships that were built in Windermere. When we had the gas station here, I remember when I got my first car that was my car, that was not a hand-me-down from my parents, but when I got my first car, that was the first place I went to fill up and to show it off to my best friend and things like that. And where that was, had that connection. There used to be where, I can't remember the name of the building, that's the 2-story building that's over here now. But there used to be a barber shop over here when I was little. And it was the kind of place, this will show you what Windermere was like back in the early 70s. My dad, kind of, for people who knew him, famously had a crew cut his entire life, from his first one in the 50s till the day he died. And he dropped me off. So I was maybe 6, but he dropped me off at the barbershop to get a haircut and was going to come back. So I was 6 years old, and he dropped me off at the barbershop because it was Windermere and you could do that because you'd be fine. So he was not there when it was my turn to get in the chair. And barber asked me what I want my hair. I said, I just want it just like my dad's. No, I did not have a crew cut at the time. And I said, what do you want? Just like my dad. Are you sure? Oh yeah, we talked about it. We hadn't talked about it. So barber gave me a crew cut, sat me back down. My dad came back to pick me up, and he walked in and he couldn't find me because he didn't recognize me because I now had no hair. Back in the day, I had a beautiful head of red hair that was no longer there. And he could tell by the look on the barber's face, that the barber immediately understood what had just happened and that we had not actually had that conversation yet, and discovered that he was terrified that he had done something terribly wrong. But when I explained to my dad, well, I just wanted a haircut like you, Dad, then what's he going to say? But it's an old family story, but it's just, like I said, kind of indicative of how things were in town back then when, it was, and again, that's not the fact that you wouldn't do that now is not a Windermere thing. That's an everywhere thing. But just kind of back in the day that you were able to have that level of trust in the town that you lived in. Ultimately, Windermere is, whether we have been here the whole time or not, because my wife and I, we were in Dr. Phillips for 18 years raising our kids, and then for 10 years after we got married in Claremont prior to that. And but Windermere still, for me, certainly always feels like home, whether I've been living here or not. My folks were still here, coming back for Christmas celebration, Thanksgiving, whatever. Coming to Windermere was still coming home. The fact that we're back here as our family in town is ideal for us. I love that we're able to be here with our family now.
My name is Craig Lee. I moved to Windermere in 1952 or 3. I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And when I was a little over a year old, my parents moved to Orlando first in the College Park area. And then from there, they met someone by the name of Ron West. And he was currently living in Windermere, introduced my parents to the town, took them on boat rides and that kind of thing. And they convinced my parents they needed to move to Windermere. So they moved in either 1952 or 53. And at the time, my dad worked for Orlando High School, which was the only high school in Orlando at the time. My mom taught at Lake Silver Elementary School, which is in College Park. So after we moved out here, I went to Windermere Elementary School, which was located here on where the town offices now are. I went in first and second grade here in Windermere. Then I went with my mom, started riding daily from Windermere into College Park, and went to Lake Silver Elementary for third through sixth. And then I went to Robert E. Lee Middle School, which is now College Park Middle School. It's been renamed. And was there in seventh and eighth grade. At that point, my mom had a baby, my little sister, Hillary. And so I lost my ride into Orlando. I then started going to Lakeview, which was seventh through 12th grade at the time. I was a ninth grader, went there ninth through 12th grade to Lakeview. We would catch the bus on Main Street at the corner of 11th and Main early in the morning. We'd ride out Chase Road around, pick up kids on the other side of Lake Butler, and then continue on to Lakeview. It was about a 1 hour bus trip at the time. And then in the afternoon, kind of reverse the same trip coming home. I guess one of the more eventful things that happened was in 1960, Hurricane Donna came through town, and it was very destructive to the town of Windermere. We lost a lot of trees, and we were living between 11th and 12th on Oakdale. And trees fell across Oakdale on both sides of our house across Oakdale. So the only way we could get out at the time was to go in the orange groves, which was the whole block from Oakdale to Maine at the time was a block full of orange trees. We would drive through that to get out to Maine, out to Main Street. And we did that. We lost power during that storm, as we did in most storms. And we didn't have power for, it was between 7 and 10 days in 1960 until the town of Windermere's power was restored in the part that we were in because of all the trees that had done destructive damage. My dad was the postmaster in Windermere for a period of about 20 to 25 years. And at the time, the post office is located where the Windermere country store was. The post office was right there adjacent to it. And any packages that were left over that hadn't been picked up prior to Christmas, the tradition was that my family would go and we'd pick up the packages from the post office on Christmas morning and deliver them around the town to the residents. So that was kind of a fun tradition. My dad would come home every day for lunch, and one day he was coming home and a bike was approaching from the other direction, and the bike ran into him. He put up his hands and broke his wrist trying to stop the bike coming down the path towards him on the sidewalk. As a teenager, I worked doing cutting yards around the town of Windermere. I'd cut between 10 and 15 yards. And now I guess that is a way that a lot of people make their income, is by going around with trailers behind trucks and putting their mowers and blowers and all those things on it. But at the time, I used to just walk down the dirt streets of Windermere, pushing my Yazoo mower to houses where I would actually cut their yard, cut their grass. When I got old enough, I think it was 16 or 17, I started working in the Windermere Country Store. I worked there for, I think, 3 or 4 years. And the Windermere Country Store had everything from hardware to it was a luncheonette. So at lunch, we'd go and we'd help serve and clear tables and that kind of thing in the luncheonette. But it was a good meeting place in town for people to go and have lunch and come and talk to people and find out what was going on in the town of Windermere. Johnny Luff was the person that actually owned the Windermere Country Store at the time. Inflation. There was inflation back in those times. And I think one of the most interesting things I had to find out about inflation was a lady in town named Susie Riles. She was a character. She had a Model A or a Model T, and the only way to start it was to hand crank it. And this lady, I would say she was in her 70s or 80s at the time, would hand crank her car to get it started with a crank on the front of it. And she was a talker, and anybody that she could corner, she would talk to them about whatever was going on. Well, one day she cornered me and she says, well, I want to tell you something that makes me so mad. She says, the power company, they have a minimum charge every month of $5 a month. And she says, it makes me so mad. All I ever turn on is a light at night. And I know I'm not using my $5 worth. I wish I could just plug a cord into the wall, run it out on the floor, and get my $5 worth of electric use for the month. It was kind of funny. She was a character. We had dance lessons growing up at the Windermere Town Hall. We would square dance and round dance and do all kinds of dancing at the town hall, learning how to do dancing. There were 2 gas stations in town at the time. There was a station owned by the Paramours, which was really kind of across the street from here. They would do everything. You'd pull in and they would put the gas into your car. They would clean your windshield. They would check your oil and everything else. Back when gas stations were service stations, and they'd actually service your vehicle while you were there. One of the other interesting things I think about Windermere was that there was a small airport just out of town. It was off of McGuire Road. Right now is where the Publix is on McGuire, but there was a small dirt strip, grass strip, I guess, there. And quite a few members of the town of Windermere, quite a few of the residents actually had small planes, and they would fly in and out of the little airport that was there. The Williams lived a couple doors down. I think you just met Lavina. Her husband, Bob, lived 2 doors down from us. And on the other side of us at the time were the Greers. Don and Carolyn Greer were raising their family. They were some of our closest neighbors at the time. Mrs. Sutton actually lived right next to us. Windermere, all summer long, all we did was wear a swimsuit and a t-shirt, and we would head off on the dirt roads, go to friends' houses, swim all day, go out and use boats and ski. We'd play football in the backyards. Just had a lot of fun. The whole summer was basically that. It was very simple time, you know, when the sun set in the afternoon, it was time to be home. My parents had an old bell that they would ring if we were on their property down at the lake or whatever. Their dinner is ready, time to come up. But people in Windermere were always very friendly. We had a lot of friends growing up. My graduating class at Lakeview, I think, was 110 kids, and 10 to 15 of those were from the town of Windermere. At the time, we won the state championship in football. We had a coach named Coach Val Heckman, who had been All-American football player at the University of Florida. I believe he was the first one as an All-American at the University of Florida. He lived in Windermere and coached the Lakeview football team, and had several other fabulous coaches at the time, Ron Lapsonsky and a couple of others, and they were just phenomenal to take a little high school that had 100 kids and go all the way to the state tournament in football. It was just amazing. Some of the kids, we were so small a school that some of the kids would play both offense and defense at the time. So Lakeview was a lot of good times. We had a lot of friends. Commuting from Windermere to Lakeview every day was very interesting. You were lucky when one of the kids in Windermere would allow you to ride home with them in the car, like Eddie Foote or Bobby Williams. And they would actually, if you could catch a ride with one of them, it would cut the ride home to about 15 minutes instead of an hour on the bus. So it was a lot easier way to get home, quicker way. Many good times, I guess, at the post office. It was just a gathering place. It was right adjacent to the country store, and everybody would come in every day. None of the mail was delivered at the time. It was put into boxes that were in the post office, and so all the residents would come there to get their mail. So you'd see a lot of the people in town every day just passing through, getting their mail, talking, saying hi, what's going on. And then they'd go in to have a cup of coffee or a Coke at the Windermere Country Store. And just meeting time, which is something that I think has disappeared in the meantime. That people just don't do that kind of thing. Now mail is delivered to a lot of houses. People don't come to a central place every day to say hi to their neighbors and that kind of thing. So you kind of lost that personal touch that we had back then.
Which parts was your dad, or which post offices was he part of it when it moved over to the Ready Market too? And then did he follow it all to where it is now, or no?
Well, he went from what is now Tim's Wine.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and then it moved over to where where Dixie Cream is now. And I think he retired while he was there. So he did not get to the new one. I'm pretty sure that was after he had already retired.
So did you work at the post office all being the postmaster's son?
No,
no part of it.
no. No, they wouldn't let anybody behind the counter really, that unless they were the employees. Lou Neighbors was one of the people that worked there. Gene Getchy also worked there in the country store. In the post office.
Tell me about the country store then, if you got any stories. You worked there for 4 years, you said. So
the country store, again, a great meeting place. Sold everything from hardware, screws, bolts, nails, whatever, to working in the fountain during the day. One of the most interesting things, I guess, at the time was when we would deliver fertilizer to people in Windermere that ordered fertilizer at the country store. And we would take Johnny Luff's station wagon and we would drive it down into what is now Islesworth subdivision, straight down Main Street. And the road used to continue into Islesworth, and there was a packing plant down there. And they would get a train load of fertilizer and put it in this building. And then we would go down and deliver 200 or 300 pounds to a family here in Windermere that wanted fertilizer. So it was kind of interesting. The car, because of all the fertilizers in the back of it, was rusting out. And it was a hot, sweaty job because it was typically in the hotter times of the year that people would fertilize. But then that has completely transitioned. When we were growing up, across from us in the lake, which is now on the east side, which is Islesworth now, was all orange groves. There were no houses on the east side of the lake. So probably 40 to 50% of the lake had no houses at all. And the west side was getting developed through the years, adding more and more houses as the years progressed. But yeah, through the years, it's gotten progressively busier. We used to ride our bikes up and down Main Street, which now there's sidewalks and you can do that on the sidewalk. But at the time, Main Street was kind of a gravel type tar. And I fell a couple of times onto that, and it was very painful because we'd be carrying a can of gas for the mower on my bike. My leg would come up and hit it, and boom, and it'd kind of go over the handlebars and end up on the road, just kind of bleeding from various places. But the town definitely has changed. The number of vehicles coming through town now is just phenomenal. I still do it on several days a week. I come through town and work in Islesworth, and the traffic backups are amazing at times, where it'll back up all the way to Apopka Island and just takes forever to get through town. So unfortunately, they thought many, many years ago there were ways to try to figure out how to get a road that would go around kind of over near Bay Hill that would connect onto Chase Road further out, or 535, and just never could make that happen. And then it got developed to the point they couldn't. But at that time, it was a lot of orange groves, and really probably could have been done if they had gotten it accomplished, and
Right.
would have helped the town of Windermere tremendously with the traffic flow in and through the town. Well, we went to Windermere Union Church, which was on 5th and Oakdale, and now is part of the Family Church, I believe is the name of the church. It transitioned from Windermere Union to the Windermere Baptist to now Family Church. But that was where we went. During the summer, we would go in and you could play ping pong and stuff in the fellowship hall. They would allow the kids to come in where it was air conditioned and play ping pong and shoot pool and that kind of thing. So kept us busy and doing fun things and off the streets basically. But so we did that. I do miss the Windermere Union Church being here in town. It transitioned out to Gotha Road, and sorry to see it go. It was kind of a neat, small church chapel kind of thing.
What caused it to go? Never really asked anybody.
I don't really know. I was actually the chairman of the board at one point for the Windermere Union Church. And then many years later is when it transitioned out. But
Size issue, maybe just outgrew it.
I think they outgrew it and wanted a new, more modern building.
Because clearly they have a preschool and everything like that.
Mhm.
The building was at risk at one point until it was sold to
Yeah.
Windermere Baptist Church,
Yeah,
which is the same church. They just renamed it because they have
Right.
other locations. It didn't make sense to have a Windermere Baptist Church down on 535.
Right. Yeah. Our kids went to what was Windermere Union Church
Right.
for preschool until they went to Windermere Elementary. My mother, when Windermere Elementary opened where it is today, she came and she was one of the initial opening teachers for the new school. So she transitioned from College Park at that point to working here in the town of Windermere at the Windermere Elementary School and helped to open it. So I remember playing in the Kernahan house, which was on 2nd Avenue. Jane Kernahan, Bob Kernahan, Marvin, I think was the oldest brother. But they had a house on 2nd Avenue that was probably half a mile maybe from Main Street out on 2nd. Great big 2-story greenhouse, and gigantic house at the time to us as kids because it was 2-story and all the other houses seemed to be 1-story in the town. But we would go in and we'd play hide and seek with them and that kind of thing. So it was kind of fun. On Sunday afternoons, one thing that happened in the town at that time was there was a gentleman's tennis match, I guess. It was here in downtown on what is now the basketball courts. But Channy Luff and Ted Johnson, Charles Lee, my dad, and several other people would get together every Sunday afternoon and play tennis doubles on the tennis courts. And then as our kids were growing up, that had transitioned. It was no longer really a tennis court, it was a basketball court. And our son, Chris, would come into town and Kevin, our youngest son, and they would play basketball on those courts. And when Shaquille O'Neal was played on the Orlando Magic, he would come after practice and come down here and just shoot hoops with the kids, and it was just a tremendous time. And he definitely had a big impact on all those kids' lives to just show up and bigger than life and play basketball with the kids of Windermere. When my wife and I got married, we lived in Orlando for a couple of years. Then we moved to Lake Haney Hills, and we moved to our current house in 1979, which is in Windermere Downs.
Okay.
On the east side of Lake Downs.
So you're close by.
We're on the lake.
Just a shot across the lake away from town.
Just right across the lake. Yeah. I'm still in the Windermere Rotary.
Yeah. Okay.
Past president, past treasurer, past secretary of the club. So
how long have you been in Rotary? That's probably because Rotary's been a part of Windermere for 50 years now?
Yes, since 1969. And I joined in 1990, early 90s, 91, 92 in that area. So I've been in for over 30 years, I guess. It's It's a good place to find out what's going on around Orange County. We have speakers that come in on all various topics and just a friendly thing to get together with a group of people every Tuesday at the town hall.
Well, my full name is Gerald William Fay. Everybody calls me Jerry. We moved here in October of 1957 from upstate New York. Been here ever since. I've had the same post office box since, and the same phone number since 1957.
What was it like when you first came
Much
here?
smaller. Was much smaller than it is now, obviously. We were, and I think John Neighbors said it best, we were free range kids. We had the whole town to ourselves. Everybody knew everybody. It was easy to get into trouble, but it was hard to get away with it because everybody knew everybody. And it's just a great place to grow up. We had, back then, we had the church had some carillon bells that would ring every evening at 6 o'clock, and that was our cue to come home if we were out playing. When you heard the church chimes, you had to go home. It was time to get home. As far as stories are concerned, I guess one that pops out was when I was working at the country store. I had just gotten back from delivering fertilizer, and Johnny Luffin, is the owner, and his wife come running out and said, "Come on, we have to go pick up Palmer," who was their son. He'd been shot. I said, "Holy crap." So they jumped in the car, and they finally told me where to go, which was here in town. And he had been out shooting his gun in the orange grove, and he did it jammed, and he tried to unjam it, and it shot him in the shoulder. So we threw him in the back of the station wagon, and we're coming back. We're going to go to the little Winter Garden Hospital. And we saw Bill Knight, who was the policeman at the time. And he was sitting there, and Johnny said, "Let's see if Bill can give us an escort to the hospital." So we did, and I can still see this. He said, "Sure." So he started the car, and he threw it in reverse and backed right into a tree, and the engine quit. He had a hard time getting his car started, but we finally got going and got Palmer to the hospital, and he's fine. You can still feel the bullet in his shoulder, but I laugh at it. It reminded me of Mayberry and Barney Fife. This that was funny.
Where was the Winter Garden Hospital at, I guess?
There's a old folks home there now. Is downtown Winter Garden. But we just had the run of the town to ourselves. It was a great place to grow up, and everything. We had no organized sports at the time. We had no Little League or Pop Warner. We did have Boy Scouts, but a lot of our interests were revolved around the lake, and we were always fishing or swimming or skiing and just whatever. And we didn't have a bunch of fancy boats like they have today. Pretty much whatever you could put together. And we all had little boats, and that's how we pretty much went around the town. All of our friends were either on the lake or had access to the lake, so we all could get around that way. Neat.
You had mentioned, it was whatever you could make. I mean, what was the typical boat like?
We had a 14-foot, maybe a 14 to 16-foot Crestliner or Durocraft. Orlando Clipper was very popular back then, with maybe a 25 horse or a 35 horse motor. But it was strong enough to get you out of the water, and we made a lot of our own water toys. We didn't have these fancy things. We would just take and make a round disc. You'd sit on the back with your feet on the front, and they were very maneuverable. We would usually steal a piece of plywood from a construction site and make the things. Nobody seemed to care. Like I said, everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew where everybody lived, obviously. Small town. I can remember we had one or two employees, and he picked up the garbage. His name was Shorty, but it was just rural America. I mean, it was typical rural America, where you didn't have a lot of fancy stuff back then. Everybody seemed to get by real well. Most people went to church on Sunday. I used to go to the Windermere Union Church. I had perfect attendance in Sunday school for 2 years. proud of that, but it's just a slower time. Things just kind of a lot less tense, it seems like, than they are today.
Right.
Uh,
We're sitting here where the old schoolhouse was, so I know
Mhm.
you went there. What can you tell us about that? We were talking about it a little bit before, so.
Yeah, as I mentioned, when I first moved here in 57, we had three classrooms and a lunchroom, and they had first and second grade were in one room with one teacher, third and fourth grade with one teacher, fifth and sixth grade with one teacher. And then from there, we all went to Lakeview High School, which was from seventh all the way through 12th. Then as I mentioned earlier, when they built the new part of the old school, our classroom got moved to the back room of town hall, where they now store all the tables and chairs. It was a very small room. Of course, we had a small class back then, but then some of those folks are still around. It's neat. We had Boy Scouts, that we met every week or every month. I can't remember. Our scoutmaster was Dick Quinn, who just passed away maybe a year ago. Nice guy, but just a fun place to grow up. Still is, I think. It's still special.
It can even be when you were on council. You said you served with several mayors.
Yeah, I
But-
served
but
with.
if there was anything
served
interested
with
at that time.
Bob Ployce and Carl Patterson, Mr. Durbin there, I served with him. I knew George Hill forever. Johnny Luff, I used to work for him. She was all these people I've known forever. Yeah, I ran for council when I was, I think, 21. Someone said I was the youngest elected official in the state that year. I can't verify that, but I was only 21, served 2 terms. That was interesting. People that have never served on even a small town council like that. It's interesting. There's a lot going on. I remember I was being interviewed by a reporter from the Orlando Sentinel one time, and she said, "Why are you running for town council?" Just off the cuff and jokingly said, "Because I need the money." Well, I mean, it's a as well as I do. You don't make a whole lot of money. In fact, it's zero.
Right.
But she printed it. That kind of ticked me off.
What about the general store? You worked there? Is there any stores?
Yeah,
there?
for Johnny Luff, we did a little bit of everything. He had a small restaurant in the back and served hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff. And then he also sold paint and lawnmowers and fertilizer and you name it. And
For people who don't know, where was it located?
corner of Fifth and Main, the building's still there. That's where Pistol and all those other real estate shops are. But I worked for him for I think 2 or 3 years after school and on Saturdays. It was great education learning there. I did learn you have to put the lid on a gallon of paint real tight before you put it in the shaker. That's easy to repaint a room that way if you don't. Yeah, I only did that once. But it was, I don't know. I could be here all day doing this. We had to make most of our own fun. Like I said, we didn't have organized sports and stuff, so we just and of course you could buy a tank of gas for a boat for $2.50, $3. Everything go over Paramore's gas station, which is where the old United Medical Building is. Some people stole gas. I don't think I ever did that, but I can admit to.
But they had gas attendants at that time, or
One.
is it one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. I can't remember his name now. Nice guy. But you go in there and they'd fill your car up, wash your windshield, check your oil and everything. They don't do that anymore, obviously. I remember when it got cold in the wintertime, they used to do what they call fire the orange groves. Some of the grove owners had these big kerosene pots. And when it got cold, they would have one every other tree. And you would light these things and warm it up enough to keep the fruits from freezing. And I did that for Mary Francis's father for a couple of years. I was the so-called foreman. He would call me and say, "We need 10 people for tomorrow night because it's supposed to get cold. And back then it did get cold. I've seen it as low as 17 here. But if it got below much below 28 or 26 degrees, then we would light the heaters, and it just made a heck of a mess. You could look, the whole area would be just a layer of soot, nasty air and stuff. Can't do that today. But that was one of the things we looked forward to because we got to get the next day off at school because we did that.
Where were those particular groves at?
Out where Disney is now.
Okay.
And Disney and a lot of motels and stuff around there. They had a lot of orange groves. We would do that.
So you'd get because of the distance, I guess you'd get dropped off there and
No, we'd
go
drive
work.
out.
Oh, okay.
We'd drive out.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd go out there early in the evening
Mhm.
because it never really got cold and those kind of temperatures until 2 or 3 in the morning. And they would monitor it real close. And then he would, they'd come around, come on, we could go light them. So you'd get everybody up. We all stayed in an old barn at the time. And then it was a nasty job. It was fun. We were all high school kids, nothing to do. And we made $10 a night doing it. So it's neat. They don't even do that today. Well, they don't have enough orange groves around here to worry about. As I said, it was just a great place to grow up. You couldn't ask for a better place as far as growing up as a young kid. I moved here when I was 8 years old in the 3rd grade and had Frank Watson's wife as a teacher. He was a mayor.
Was there a time where you started seeing, some significant change, or has it just been,
Well,
slow, steady, or
No, probably when Disney decided to come to the area, that's when things really blew up. But prior to that, on these dirt streets, when you're just learning to drive, I think 2 or 3 of us had little Volkswagens, and we used to race through town and cause havoc, and people would complain to our parents. The policeman never caught us. But it was dangerous, pretty stupid. But then again, we were teenagers, we didn't worry too much about that. But yeah, I saw it started to change once Disney came in. A lot of their executives moved to Windermere, and some of them are still here.
right?
We just said goodbye to one of them last weekend. Yeah, that's when it started to kind of, and the prices, used to be nobody wanted to live out here. They thought all we had was alligators and mosquitoes, and a trip to Orlando was a big deal. That's where you did most of your shopping, I guess, that in Winter Garden, obviously.
Your family then would go to downtown Winter Garden for, most of the shopping and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mom would go to Winn-Dixie down there on Dillard Street and do all of her shopping. Used to go to Dr. Gleason. He lives in Wheeling. He had 2 or 3 doctors back then, Gleason, Scanlon, and Bradford. I knew all of them, went to high school with their kids, played in the band with Dr. Bradford's son, Wade. We had a band in high school. Weren't very good, but we thought we were.
Well, we could go back to because I know the Disney was the cause of a Disney boom of sorts, for all of Orlando. And you said there was some change to, what specifically to Windermere? Was it a notice of an influx of traffic? Was it just people moving to here because it was closer to the facilities, or
traffic? I have to say was probably, in my opinion, the biggest boom. And I think real estate prices probably started to escalate when Disney came in because more people found out about Windermere and thought it was a great place to live. And so the home prices went up, I think. And as you well know, they continue to go up.
During those years, I guess, efforts by the town to, promote themselves, or has it always been the same? We just keep to ourselves.
No,
And,
we
it just
pretty much
happened.
have tried to, in my opinion,
Mhm.
tried to keep to ourselves and make life better for the residents that were already here and not promote the town to get more people to move in. Our infrastructure wouldn't support, as you well know, our roads back then. Well, roads today can't handle the traffic, much less the roads we had back then with the stop signs, and we were all totally against traffic lights. The traffic circles work out fine. I think I was on the Long Range Planning Committee for years, appointed by Mrs. Ruenheck, former mayor, and that's when we decided to go to the traffic circles. And that seems to have made a big difference. But it's still congested at certain times, especially during the school year.
What was that? I guess what was the breaking point? I guess for that to be on LRP's agenda, the traffic circles. I mean, I guess the way it is now, backing up for
Yeah, some of the, the residents complaining they can't get out of their streets and all this stuff, and we decided we have to do something. So they threw it to the long range planning, and I think we probably hired some consultants and said, well, let's go with the traffic circles. I think that was a good idea. I think it's worked out well. I know there's going to put one more in town, going out of town, but I think it works out. I like it better than this traffic light thing.
right.
Yeah, we've had some interesting police officers. Bill Knight, like I mentioned earlier, was a nice guy. He used his own car, had a Ford Falcon. That was a police car back then. I think I remember the town, because of some budgetary problems, could only have the policeman here so many days or certain days a week. So they had published that in the paper, that told everybody when the policeman was going to be on duty. So if you wanted to commit a crime, you know which days to pick. Just pick a day that the policeman wasn't going to be here. That was kind of a stupid thing to do.
Yeah, I would assume were there still fish camps around or anything, or summer homes like that?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
anything
At
in
the end
those
of
regards
Bumby,
that
at
can-
the end of Bumby Point was the old Bumby house that's now gone, but that was just an old fish or summer lake house, I guess, for lack of a better term, that they built by the Bumby family. They owned Bumby Hardware, and Bumby Street is named after them in Orlando. The other side of Lake Butler, a lot of they're now nice homes, but those were just fish camps or lake houses owned by a lot of people in Winter Garden. And like I said, that was in the summertime when we were all out of school. That was our whole life revolved around the lakes, And you go to one guy's house and we'd swim and ski all day, or we'd go to somebody else's house, do the same thing. It was just neat. We didn't realize how good we had it back then.
So did you you guys just skied for fun, or was there anybody that tried to make a professional out of it that you
Well,
hung out with, or-
my brother skied competitively, well enough so the Craft sponsored him and gave him a boat every year. But no, we didn't, like I said earlier, we didn't have fancy ski equipment that they do today. Most of us just did it for fun, and we'd, do stupid things like take one of those tabletops that I mentioned earlier, and one guy would put a step ladder on it and he'd ski around on top of a step ladder. Eddie Ogren, he was a character. Drugs were never a problem back when I was growing up here. If you snuck out and stole one of your parents' cigarettes and went out and smoked it, that was a big deal, and boy, to think of having a beer before you were 18 or 21, boy, you just didn't do that.
All right, tell us
One-
about the
one
party
time-
on Lake Butler.
One time, no, we were heading over there, my wife Karen and my son Kevin and I, and we saw this little alligator. He may be 2 or 3 feet long, crossing the dirt road. And I said, we need to move him or he's going to get run over. So my son grabbed him, but he didn't grab him quite right. And the gator swung around, bit his arm pretty good. And by the time that story got to the rest of the family, it was a 6-foot gator, and he nearly lost his arm, but it was just a little, it was funny. But that's what you did back then, Yeah, we used to catch them when I was a kid. We never hurt them, never killed any of them, but there seemed to be a lot more of them around back then. I remember one time, speaking of wildlife, Butch Meredith and I were out hunting rabbits at night, and well, that's illegal, so we couldn't have been doing that. Anyway, we were walking through the grove at night, and we saw a car parked there, and so that's Eddie Foot's car, and the windows were all steamed up, and so we said, let's have a little fun. So we snuck around and we jumped on the bumper and started bouncing the car up and down. And I can still hear Eddie to this day. You boys better cut that out. He knew exactly who it was. He knew we were just screwing with him. So he came out of the car finally, and Butch and I laughed. I don't think Eddie thought it was too funny, but then he went back to what he was doing, and Butch and I went back to patrolling the orange grove at night, I guess. Illegal to hunt back then at night, still is. He knew who was messing with him.
No, I think there's a statute of limitations, right?
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
This is Mark Allen. I've been a town resident in Windermere for more than 20 years.
Just for the record, Mark is one of the owners of Allen's Creamery that was previously here in town, and we're going to have a discussion about the creamery and maybe the downtown businesses and kind of that landscape we may get into. So the floor is yours.
All right. Well, until Allen's Creamery came into town, everybody knew the Ready Mart. That was the place to go, for treats and, the ices and all that. So, more than 15 years ago, we came into the town of Windermere with a concept of a family ice cream shop. And our goal was, to offer a large variety of hand scooped ice cream with a lot of flavors and make it very family friendly. I can remember sitting at the first town council meeting and waiting for my turn to get up, to tell them what we were planning for the old dentist's office that used to be there for 17 years. And I waited in the back, and I ended up being the last person to get up and speak. And Mayor Brune said to me, "Sir, you've been sitting here all the time. What are you here for?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to start the process of getting approved to put an ice cream shop in downtown Windermere." And they said, "You sat through all this entire meeting?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to make sure I did the right protocol and waited my turn." So that was kind of the start of it. And from there, we worked through getting all the approvals and so forth through the different, municipalities in the town and so forth. And little did any of us know, the mayor, the council people, that we would have a run of more than 15 years and, have such an impact on the town of Windermere. It's really interesting. Allen's was more than just an ice cream shop. We dedicated, a lot of our business to charity work. We worked with a lot of community organizations, schools. We worked with the AAU football program, the Windermere Little League, a lot of churches. So there was a lot of charity work that was done from there. It was more than just, an ice cream shop. We were a family ice cream parlor, but at the same time, we became a well-known landmark for the town of Windermere. Our family believed that having a family-friendly ice cream parlor in the heart of Windermere and giving back to the community was a tremendous asset to our town and the heartfelt and loving give back to our community. I was also part of the Downtown Business Committee, as well as Chris sitting here with us, and we did a lot in the 7 years that we were involved. We helped get the food truck event started for the town. We helped get the farmers market, here to the town, and the Allen's Creamery was always there to participate in any of the town events. The food trucks have taken off and is still going very strong. People love the farmers market. In the 7 years that we were involved with the Downtown Business Committee, we had an auto show, which was the first ever for the town. And we did that for several years very successfully. The interesting thing is we had so many people engaged with our ice cream shop and spending their Sundays or going there after sporting events or just a place for the family to kind of escape from everything. And, who doesn't love ice cream? It was a really good thing for the town. The funny part is some of the kids that worked at the ice cream shop in the very beginning, 15 years ago, some of them are now married with children and they visited the ice cream shop. So they would tell their kids, "I worked here when it first opened," or, this was the place that, I in high school or in college worked my summers. So it was just an interesting thing with the dynamic of the generations just within a 15-year period. It was amazing that the ice cream shop could have such a tremendous lifelong impact, on the residents. Like I said, Allen's became a landmark and a center point of the town of Windermere, and it'll be, dearly missed. We have, a lot of people that continue to come up to me all the time and tell us what a great thing it was and how much they miss it. I kind of look at the town of Windermere. People ask me, having lived here for more than 20 years, what do you think of the town? How do you like the town? I said, it reminds me of Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show. I go, it's a quaint little town. You never have any real crime issues. It's an affluent community, but it's extremely centered around family, between the stuff they do with Santa Claus and Christmas and the Easter egg hunts and the Halloween parades. It's just it's a great place to raise a family. I raised 4 kids here, and we were fortunate. My kids, enjoyed the Butler chain and the fishing and the wakeboarding and all the other things that it has to offer. I think my kids will eventually probably settle back here. They like the town of Windermere so much. One thing my wife brought up is, Mayor O'Brien, his father-in-law would frequent the ice cream shop, and they'd go there, and we have a plaque on the bench, commemorating, his father-in-law and how they went there every Sunday together and spent time. So just things like that. We had people propose for weddings. We had, people go there after sporting events, and it was just a place that everybody seemed to gather that, said, this is just a wonderful place to spend some time. Having been in Florida for 40 years, I can't imagine living anywhere else. It's just, Windermere has something that I think, it's hard to find in a lot of communities. And I've been all over Florida. And although I'm biased as living here for more than 20 years, I just love, what Windermere has to offer. Just to conclude, when Allen's Creamery announced it was closing, we were absolutely overwhelmed with, the local newspapers calling us, the social media. If you looked on Facebook or Instagram, hundreds of people writing about their memories and things that happened. So, I think, a lot of families in the years to come will remember back that little quaint ice cream shop called Allen's Creamery. And hopefully, it's a memory a lot of people will keep forever. So we're very grateful to the town of Windermere. Lived here a long time, and can't imagine a better place to live.
That's awesome. As we do these interviews and we talk to people that grew up here, maybe in the 40s and such, like some of these meeting places over the years, like the general stores or even the post office, were the place where the community can come together. And there seems to be that gap, for a long period of time until Allen's came in and it became that community point. So you guys took that torch and became a centerpiece. And, it's unfortunate you guys are gone. Maybe that torch has moved over to Windermere Brewing because, when you started, we never thought there would be a brewery that came in here. So it'd be exciting to see, kind of who takes that next torch. But that's where I saw it as that community center when it lacked it at the time, and kind of really the start with the creamery and then the involvement of the downtown business committee kind of revitalized our downtown area that frankly was at the time just full of real estate offices and maybe hair salons. And that was just about it, especially when the Ready Market left. So it's awesome.
Yeah, Chris, you and I did a lot, when we were both on the business committee, and, my brother Matt was on it. I just feel like we really did a lot to, bring things to the town. And like you said, up until Allen's Creamery was here, it was a lot of real estate offices and, beauty salons. And so, we kind of broke the ice, and now, you've got, a couple restaurants in town now. You got the new center that's going to go up. And that's kind of what we thought. We had hundreds and hundreds of people that over the last year and a half have called or emailed or texted us, are you guys going to open in the new center? And we said, no, it's kind of handing the torch off. Let the next group, do that. And there'll be some restaurants, some nice restaurants in there. And we're proud of what we did. We're proud of, the impact it had. And it's really been a great run for us.